Welcome to this week's Global Intelligence Weekly Wrap-Up, your trusted source for intelligence insight and national security analysis that goes beyond the headlines. Neil Bisson is a retired intelligence officer with the Canadian Security Intelligence Service and the director of the Global Intelligence Knowledge Network. He brings over 25 years of intelligence experience to help you understand the world's most pressing security threats. This week, the briefing begins in the Baltic Sea, where Finland has charged a Russian-linked tanker crew with sabotaging undersea cables. In Norway, the spy chief blames Russian hackers for seizing control of a dam. In Australia, a Chinese national faces foreign interference charges tied to covert surveillance. In Hong Kong, a typhoon delays the trial of pro-democracy media mogul Jimmy Lai. Our main stories this week focus on the United States, and the Trump administration uses tariffs for national security leverage and approves a controversial AI chip deal with China. Here in Canada, CSIS warns of escalating Iranian threats, Lebanon's president pushes back on foreign interference, and the House of Commons investigates a serious cyber breach linked to foreign actors. This is the modern battlefield, and Neil has the briefing you won't hear anywhere else. So, let's get into it.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Global Intelligence Weekly Wrap-Up. I'm your host, Neil Bisson, a retired intelligence officer with the Canadian Security Intelligence Service and the director of the Global Intelligence Knowledge Network. As many of my listeners may have noticed, I've been away from the microphone for a few weeks. This was less intentional than it was inevitable. I was unfortunately under the weather for a few weeks, and then I've been traveling, so I'm back, and as usual, there's a lot to discuss, analyze, and provide intelligence on. So sit back, grab your favorite beverage, and let's get caught up on what's been happening in the world of intelligence. For our first story this week, we start in Finland, where the Finnish government has formally charged the captain, first officer, and second officer of the oil tanker Eagle S, a vessel linked to Russia's so-called shadow fleet with aggravated sabotage and aggravated interference with telecommunications. Prosecutors allege that the ship dragged its anchor across the seabed in the Gulf of Finland last December, damaging 5 undersea cables and causing at least 60 million euros in repairs, while also posing a serious threat to Finland's energy and communications infrastructure. This incident is part of a growing pattern of suspected shadow tactics in the Baltic region. On Christmas Day 2024, the S-Link 2 power cable between Finland and Estonia was destabilized under suspicious circumstances, triggering heightened scrutiny of the Eagle S. Prior to that, simultaneous disruptions to the Sea Lion 1 and other telecom cables in November 2024 raised fears of coordinated sabotage. In response, NATO deployed a proactive naval flotilla off Estonia to safeguard critical undersea infrastructure. Finland's Deputy Prosecutor General has emphasized that the country has jurisdiction in the case, arguing that even if the damaging actions took place outside territorial waters, their effects occurred within Finland's borders. This legal approach reflects growing concerns among Europeans and NATO officials about the vulnerability of submarine cables to covert attack. These charges against the Eagle S crew highlight the increasing weaponization of maritime infrastructure as a form of gray zone tactics. The outcome of this case could set a precedent and help deter future acts of sabotage, but it remains uncertain whether it will fully dissuade state-linked actors. In the near term, we can expect to see tighter security measures, increased seabed surveillance, and stronger redundancy in energy and communication systems across the Baltic region. We continue our discussion on Russian gray zone tactics in our next segment, where we discuss how Norway's counterintelligence chief has officially blamed Russian hackers for a cyber attack on the dam in Bermanger this past April, marking the first time Oslo has publicly attributed such infrastructure interference to its neighbor. On April 7th, attackers briefly seized remote control of the dam's floodgate, releasing water at a rate of 500 liters per second for approximately 4 hours until the breach was halted. Fortunately, the incident caused no injuries or direct harm, but dramatically demonstrated vulnerabilities in Norway's critical hydropower infrastructure. Norway relies heavily on hydropower for its electricity generation, making it a potential target for cyber or physical sabotage. This incident represents a potential escalation of hybrid warfare tactics, where technological means are used to create fear and disrupt society, without necessarily inflicting physical damage. Viet Gegnes, head of Norway's PST security agency, warned that pro-Russian cyber actors have shifted towards more aggressive operations designed to sow fear and chaos. She stressed that these activities are becoming increasingly dangerous, urging citizens to stay vigilant. Russia, however, rejected the accusation, calling it politically motivated and unfounded. This cyber-enabled act of sabotage, even though non-violent, marks a significant escalation in the targeting of Europe's critical infrastructure. It signals that adversaries may prefer disruptive psychological tactics over outright destruction. This is a wake-up call for Canadian critical infrastructure. As Canada continues to support Ukraine, we are a viable target for Russian sabotage techniques, and given Russia's use of hacking groups to cause damage to any country that they choose, we are clearly in their sights. Norway's public attribution may serve as a deterrent, but it also highlights the need for heightened resilience across vital systems. Expect Norway and its allies to invest heavily in cybersecurity and critical infrastructure, especially energy facilities, as hybrid threats continue to evolve. From Russian sabotage to Chinese foreign interference. In our next segment, we're discussing a Chinese national facing charges under Australia's foreign interference laws following revelations of significant unexplained wealth discovered during a search of her home. Police uncovered multiple luxury items, including Hermes, Burberry, Gucci, and Louis Vuitton goods, numerous properties and vehicles, and a Rolex watch valued at Australian $24,000, along with an undisclosed item valued at over $400,000. She remains in custody after being denied bail, with concerns she might flee the country. Court documents allege the woman received directives from the Chinese Public Security Bureau beginning in 2022. Her mission was to infiltrate and monitor the operations of the banned Buddhist group Guan Yin Sita Dharma Door in Australia, employing covert measures such as photographing chapter locations, front doors, and leaders' addresses. The group's Australian branch continues to operate legally despite being proscribed in China. Authorities note that the accumulation of high-value goods and real estate without legitimate sources of income points towards state-sponsored influence activity. The denial of bail underscores the seriousness of the charges and the concern that the accused may attempt to evade prosecution. This case highlights the growing risk of foreign operatives using financial inducements and covert surveillance tactics to influence domestic groups and monitor diaspora communities. Upcoming court procedures may provide further insight into the scale of the operation and whether additional individuals were implicated. Our next segment deals with the Typhoon, but not the Chinese hacking group. In Hong Kong, the high-profile national security trial of pro-democracy media tycoon Jimmy Lai has been delayed due to a severe typhoon. Lai, a dual British-Chinese citizen, stands accused of colluding with foreign forces under Beijing's controversial national security law, a charge that could see him spend the rest of his life in prison. Lai, founder of the now-defunct Apple Daily newspaper, is one of the most prominent figures charged under the national security law introduced in 2020 after mass pro-democracy protests. His prosecution is widely seen by critics as emblematic of how the law is being used to silence political opposition. The trial, already in its final stages, has drawn international attention, with UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer calling for his release. Jimmy Lai's story is one of rags to riches. Born in Guangzhou, he fled to Hong Kong at the age of 12 and built a fortune through his clothing brand, Giordano, before turning to media and outspoken political activism following the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre. His Apple Daily and other publications became known for their fearless criticism of Beijing, earning him both admiration in Hong Kong and hostility from mainland authorities. Lai's activism came at a great personal risk. His home and offices have been attacked. He survived an assassination plot, and he's been repeatedly arrested. He has remained defiant, warning that the national security laws mark the death knell for Hong Kong's freedoms and predicting it would erode the city's global financial standing. Human rights groups and foreign governments argue that Lai's case is a litmus test for Hong Kong's rule of law and freedom of the press. His son, Sebastian Lai, has called for urgent international action, warning that even a short sentence could effectively be a death penalty for his father because of his age and health. Sebastian also frames the trial as a key issue in China-UK relations, saying it will reveal whether Britain will stand up for one of its citizens when it matters most. The delay caused by the typhoon is only a temporary pause in a trial that has become a global flashpoint for the future of civil liberties in the UK. The delay caused by the typhoon is only a temporary pause in the trial that has become a global flashpoint for the future of civil liberties in Hong Kong. The outcome will signal either a reinforcement of Beijing's grip over the territory or an opportunity, however slim, for an international community to influence the fate of one of Hong Kong's most high-profile dissidents. Back to North America for our next story, where internal documents reveal that the Trump administration deployed tariffs not only for economic leverage, but as a strategic tool to further national security objectives. Around the time President Trump suspended reciprocal tariffs, officials crafted negotiating strategies that tied trade concessions to military and diplomatic commitments. These include urging countries near China to buy U.S. military equipment, host U.S. troops, or remove Chinese control from critical ports. The draft plans even push for other nations to vote against global maritime emissions regulations, turning trade negotiations into a platform for multi-domain influence. This approach represents a significant expansion of trade as foreign policy, blending economic coercion with geopolitical aims. Traditional trade agreements seldom encompass issues like defense posture, military basing, supply chain control, or climate diplomacy. By leveraging tariffs in this way, the administration aimed to reshape global alignment and contain Chinese influence over several regions, including Southeast Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and South America. Observers note the unusual scope of the leaked proposal, with one seasoned trade official describing it as unprecedented, where he was quoted as saying, "When you're sitting at the negotiation table, you're not talking about this stuff," unquote. The proposals reflect an intentional use of economic tools to extract strategic concessions and signal that trade and security are no longer siloed. The shift underscores how economic tools are increasingly welded for geopolitical objectives. This is a lesson that Canada needs to learn quickly. National security is not unaffected by the country's economy, and other countries are aware of this fact. But more importantly, they will utilize foreign intelligence collection to gain advantage economically over both adversary and ally. By embedding security imperatives into trade talks, the administration blurred the lines between market access and strategic alignment. The implications are far-reaching, and we may see partner nations reevaluate how they approach bilateral deals, anticipating that economic agreements now come with defense strings attached. Expect future negotiations to increasingly focus on integrated trade security agendas and for other governments to adapt their strategies in response. We're sticking with U.S. national security policy for our next segment, where we discuss President Trump's highly unconventional deal permitting Nvidia and AMD to resume AI chip exports, specifically their H20 processors, to China, in return for the U.S. government receiving a 15% cut of their related revenues. This marks a sharp reversal on long-standing U.S. policy, which treated export controls on sensitive technologies as absolute and non-negotiable. The new arrangement effectively places a price tag on national security access, raising concerns among lawmakers and experts about the emergence of a pay-for-play precedent that critics warn exporting sensitive technologies in exchange for revenue could undermine the future policy integrity. The Trump administration had previously banned the export of Nvidia's H20 chips to China earlier in 2025. After intense lobbying and negotiation, restrictions were eased, now tied with this revenue-sharing scheme. Trump has also indicated willingness to approve a scaled-down version of Nvidia's next-gen Blackwell GPU for China, albeit with reduced performance, while securing the same 15% revenue cut. Lawmakers from both parties have voiced strong opposition. Representative John Molinar labeled export controls as frontline defense, cautioning that monetizing them risks eroding their strategic purpose. Ranking Democrat Raja Krishnamurthy warned that putting a price on security signals that American national security principles are negotiated for the right fee. Legal scholars have questioned the legality of this structure, suggesting it might resemble an unconstitutional export tax forbidden by the U.S. Constitution. Industry analysts also warn this could squeeze margins at chip makers and trigger similar demands across industries, with some forecasting a potential 5 to 15% point hit to gross margins on China-bound chips. This deal fundamentally shifts the calculus on U.S. exports controls, turning them from security measures into potential revenue streams. It raises serious questions about legality, fiscal responsibility, and national security consistency. Essentially, it says that the current U.S. administration is willing to sell out national security as long as the price is right. If allowed to stand, it may establish a dangerous precedent that undermines U.S. credibility with allies and emboldens adversaries. Looking ahead, congressional oversight is likely to intensify. Legal challenges could emerge, and we may see increased enforcement measures, such as embedding tracking devices in chip shipment, already being deployed to curb diversions to China. From the U.S. to Canada for this next segment, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service is warning that threats from Iran's theocratic regime could escalate in Canada this year, particularly if tensions in the Middle East intensify. According to CSIS, the Islamic Republic of Iran continues to orchestrate threats to life on Canadian soil, often outsourcing the work to members of transnational organized crime networks. Targets include journalists, dissidents, and others critical of Tehran's regime. This warning comes after two Canadian journalists with the London-based Persian news outlet Iran International received explicit threats from Iran, including abduction plans. The threat coincided with significant geopolitical developments, including U.S. strikes on Iranian nuclear sites and Israel's killing of senior Iranian security officials and nuclear scientists. Iran International, which is critical of Tehran, has been the target of intimidation campaigns worldwide, with its journalists in multiple countries facing harassment, violence, and threats to their families. One high-profile Canadian example involves former Justice Minister Irwin Cotler, who remains under 24-hour police protection after RCMP foiled an alleged Iranian plot to assassinate him. Internationally, there have been violent incidents as well, such as the stabbing of Iranian international journalist Pohra Zarati in London by 2 assailants, both later charged. CSIS has publicly acknowledged ongoing investigations into Iranian threat activity in Canada, but has withheld operational details to protect intelligence sources and methods. The agency assesses that Iran is likely to continue leveraging organized crime groups to intimidate or harm perceived enemies abroad. This mirrors broader warnings from Canada and allied nations, which have jointly condemned Iranian intelligence services for increasing collaboration and criminal organizations to target individuals overseas. Iran's tactics represent a dangerous blend of state-directed repression and criminal outsourcing, making attribution and disruption more complex. For Canada, the challenge lies in safeguarding those targeted by such threats while countering the use of local criminal proxies by foreign intelligence services. This is likely to remain a pressing national security issue, particularly as Middle Eastern tensions ebb and flow in the months ahead. Our next story brings us to Lebanon, where Lebanon's president, Joseph Aoun, firmly rebuffed external meddling during a visit by Iran security chief Ali Larijani, underscoring that only state institutions have the authority to bear arms while rejecting reliance on foreign backing. At a high-stakes meeting in Babda, the president of Lebanon asserted that, quote, "It is forbidden for anyone to bear arms and to use foreign backing as leverage," unquote. His remark came just after Lebanon's cabinet approved a U.S.-backed roadmap to disarm Hezbollah, signaling a broader intent to centralize security power under state control. He emphasized cooperation with Iran is acceptable so long as it remains rooted in mutual respect and sovereignty, not aligned to sectarian interests. This statement represents a significant move in Lebanon's ongoing efforts to reassert sovereign control over armed groups. Lebanon has long been under pressure to rein in non-state actors, especially Hezbollah, which holds substantial military capacity and receives support from Iran. The U.S.-backed disarmament plan, including a ceasefire with Israel, is seen as a path towards international aid and reconstruction. However, Iran and Hezbollah have expressed strong opposition, viewing it as an infringement on Lebanon's internal balance. President Aoun's posture reflects a deliberate shift away from sectarian dependency and towards empowering state institutions. His remarks come amid heightened tensions. Earlier this month, several Shiite ministers affiliated with Hezbollah and Amal walked out of a cabinet session in protest of disarmament efforts. The president of Lebanon's message may also serve as a deterrent against external actors seeking to influence Lebanon's fragile political equilibrium. This confrontation underscores a turning point for Lebanon's sovereignty and internal security architecture. Aoun's message is clear. Lebanon's stability rests in unified governance, not in divided loyalties. Going forward, the success of state-led disarmament efforts will be the litmus test for Lebanon's political maturity and may influence whether international aid and diplomatic support can be fully mobilized. For our last story this week, we end up in the land of the strong and free. Canada's House of Commons is investigating a significant data breach following a cyber attack that targeted sensitive internal systems, raising concerns about both potential espionage and domestic security vulnerabilities. The breach was discovered when House staff were notified that a threat actor exploited a recently disclosed Microsoft vulnerability to access a database used to manage Commons computers and mobile devices. The attacker reportedly stole employees' personal information, including names, job titles, email addresses, and office locations, highlighting the exposure of critical internal systems. While the House of Commons itself has not issued a public statement, the incident was first reported by the CBC. The breach is now under investigation by Canada's Communication Security Establishment, or CSE, which is collaborating with parliamentary IT staff to determine the full scope of the damage. As authorities work to attribute the attack, there is heightened concern that this may be part of a broader wave of state-sponsored cyber operations targeting governmental infrastructure. CSE emphasized that attributing cyber incidences to specific actors is complex and time-consuming, underscoring the need for rigorous forensics before drawing conclusions. The breached Microsoft vulnerabilities, among them those affecting SharePoint Server and Microsoft Exchange, have been under active exploitation globally, including by advanced groups linked to foreign governments and criminal networks. This suggests that the threat landscape is evolving rapidly, with Canada increasingly in the crosshairs. This breach signals a serious intrusion into Canada's democratic infrastructure, exposing how persistent and advanced cyber adversaries have become, even without direct evidence of forensic intelligence involvement. Yet, the potential for coordinated attacks on Parliament systems cannot be ignored. Canadian government departments, especially political, policing, and national security, are high-value targets for foreign state actors. The Canadian government's stats on how often there have been breaches indicates a very frightening pattern. In recent months, Canada has faced multiple high-level breaches attributed to or suspected of involving foreign state actors. In February 2025, a Chinese state-linked group known as Typhoon compromised network devices at a Canadian telecommunications provider, prompting joint warnings from the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity and the FBI. Just weeks earlier, still unidentified hackers breached the secure VPN of Global Affairs Canada, getting access to internal emails, calendars, and contacts, an incident that underscored how even highly protected government systems remain vulnerable to sophisticated intrusion attempts. These incidents are happening with more frequency than ever before, and Canada needs to realize the ripple effects that these compromises could have going forward. Foreign interference has been identified as a threat to Canada's sovereignty and political system. A breach of this nature signifies that foreign actors could have access to needed information to spoof politicians, conduct spear-phishing campaigns, or access potentially compromising information. Looking ahead, the Canadian government will need to heighten investments in cyber resilience, expedite vulnerability patching protocols, and enact new legislation addressing cybersecurity standards for government networks. Okay, that'll wrap up this week's episode. I want to let my audience know that I recently had the opportunity to participate in an interview with Matthew A. McDonald, a writer, director, and videographer who is currently working on a documentary TV series featuring first-hand accounts by former CSIS officers. Some of the stories concern covert missions from around the world, including stopping assassins, rescuing hostages, and infiltrating terrorist groups. The series will challenge everything you thought you knew about the history of Canada's spy service. I will leave a link in the transcript, and I highly recommend that you check it out. As always, all the links to the stories discussed are in the transcript. So until next week, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe.
That wraps up this week's Global Intelligence Weekly Wrap-Up. From Russian-linked sabotage in the Baltic and cyber attacks on critical infrastructure, to Chinese foreign interference, alarming shifts in U.S. national security policy, and mounting threats from Iran. Global security challenges are growing more complex, and Canada is not immune. This podcast takes time, effort, and hard-earned experience to produce. This podcast exists to help you stay aware, stay prepared, and see beyond the headlines. If today's episode gave you valuable insight, please like, share, and leave a review. It helps others discover the show and builds a community of informed listeners. To support this mission, you can also visit Buzzsprout, where your contribution helps keep the podcast independent, sharp, and focused on the intelligence that matters most. The risks to national security continue to grow, but understanding the threats is the first step toward combating them. Until next time, as Neil always reminds us, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe.